My name's Louis. I'm a junior in AIM, and I'm from Beijing. The field of consulting is pretty simple. What you do is you work for an organization that provides expert advice, whether it be management, whether it be IT strategy, etc., to various businesses across many industries. So we're talking healthcare, pharmaceuticals, financial services, the whole lot. It appeals to a lot of majors because a lot of individuals view it as an extended major or college where they can pursue various passions, so they're not confined within specific industries. And they have a chance to engage with many different industries before they actually choose which one that they want to delve deep into. So a case study interview is the fundamental way that a consulting firm will test a candidate's capabilities specific to consulting. And the way it works is the interviewer will address the candidate with a business problem. It's the responsibility and the role of the candidate to ask probing questions and gather further information to answer the question. So topics will include, for instance, a profitability analysis. So if a company is losing money, why are they losing money and what recommendations they should make in order to prevent that from happening in the future. It could be a mergers and acquisitions case where company X wants to buy company Y, and what are the factors that they should consider, ultimately resulting in a recommendation of go versus no go. And finally, potentially market entry as well. So should company X enter into any international market such as Brazil or China? Again, it's the fundamental way that a interviewer will test for your ability to solve business problems. It tests for logical thinking. It tests also for your ability to think under pressure, specifically under a client-facing scenario. In preparing for a case study, I think a lot of it boils down to practice, and there's only so much that you can do from reading, for instance, Case Interview Secrets by Victor Chang or Case in Point. Those are the two major case books that people will read before case interviews. But you don't really have an opportunity to realize those concepts and those principles unless you actually practice. So I know when I personally was preparing for case interviews this past recruitment cycle, I was doing a case a day, for instance. And what you realize after a certain while is that you get past the intimidation factor of, wow, a case is so difficult, like how I must be perceived as, relatively unintelligent. But rather the way you approach it is, it's an interesting business problem that you can't wait to get to the end of. And that's when I think your ability to shine as a candidate really comes through. So in terms of specific strategies that you can apply to your case interview, there's definitely a laundry list of ideas that you can get from Case Interview Secrets or Case in Point. But I will touch upon, I guess, a little bit upon the areas that are untraditional. So for instance, utilizing specific frameworks. So a lot of books might tell you to utilize the 4 Ps or the 5 Ps or the 3 Cs. If you actually do that in a case interview, that's not beneficial whatsoever because the case interviewer will just think, well, any candidate can present, a Porter's 5 forces analysis. So what will make you unique? The way you should approach it is very loosely follow these frameworks and add in specific buckets or categories of analysis that are specific to the case itself. That not only demonstrates that, you're not a robot reiterating or regurgitating sort of the frameworks that you learned in class, but it also shows that you can apply real world knowledge to consulting. Another example that I would use, or another specific practice that I would use, is to tie in examples from the real world. And this is especially important, and it sort of serves as the icing on the cake because it, again, demonstrates that you're taking something that's dead in terms of the case interview and you're applying real world information, and that influences your decision. That's going to put you one step ahead of other candidates who are recruiting for the same position. Again, I think practice is key for any case study interview. And this is especially true. Again, for me, what I did was I did a case a day. I was able to find peers and friends and club members in order to do a case a day, as well as have the resources such as casebooks in order to do so. I think practice is key, and the only reason I say that is because there's no other scenario where you can actually demonstrate and go through the process itself. Like no amount of reading or listening to Look Over My Shoulder by Victor Chang, for instance, will be able to replicate that. So I'm interested in consulting actually. I've been interested, I guess, for 2 or 3 years now. My mom is actually an IT consultant for a private equity firm back home, and she took me on a couple of her client runs winter break of freshman year of college. And what really appealed to me wasn't just that she was able to provide such expert advice to these portfolio companies that a lot of people were really interested in, but also the client-facing aspect of it. So she was able to interact, with the C-suite of these startups and essentially provided them advice because she was the expert and they took her very seriously, right? And I think that's something that really appeals to me as someone who I perceive as more of a client-facing individual. That as well as just the problem-solving aspect of it. The best piece of advice that I've received so far from my peers as well as my friends and family is to really never settle. So this past summer, for instance, I had a return offer to the consulting firm that I was working at, but my friends approached me and said that I should probably recruit for a firm that is either more prestigious or works on more interesting problems. Originally, I wasn't thinking about recruiting just because I was comfortable in the position that I was in. So that's one concept that I think applies to me specifically. I think for the Cornell community, it's that showing up, and I mean showing up in a metaphorical sense, is really 90% of any accomplishment. And what this means is if you, so I think applying, for instance, to X number of jobs can be considered showing up. So I remember my sophomore year, I applied to 63 internships and I got one interview. And I was fortunate enough that that interview turned out to be obviously the internship that I got. But if I hadn't applied to all of those opportunities, I probably wouldn't have had the opportunity to interview. Something that I wish I knew my freshman year at Cornell, especially my sophomore year as well, is sort of the extent of how to do networking correctly. And this is actually especially true when I went to Deloitte University this past semester, competing in the national case comp there. One of the partners sat us down and said that they've eliminated kids from their applicant pool because they were poor at networking. And I think a lot of people have the assumption that networking is an opportunity for you to convey to the individual at the firm the various accomplishments that you've done in the past, whether it be an internship or your extracurricular at Cornell. And this is just so far from the truth. And the true purpose of networking really is just to establish that you're a social and cultural fit within the firm. A lot of this doesn't have to do with what you've accomplished either at Cornell or in high school, or your past internship, for instance, freshman year or sophomore year. Again, it's an opportunity for you to really make beyond a surface level connection with the employees at the firm. Try to relate to something that isn't work related, right? And follow up on that, because that's the only way that networking will be in your favor, as opposed to for everyone else, if they just try to communicate their accomplishments, that's very much so a turnoff for employees at the firm. Elevator pitch is, I think, traditionally been misinterpreted in the sense that a lot of people sort of just will take it in a very literal sense, in that they'll spend 30 seconds talking about all of their accomplishments and why they're suited for the job. I think in the real world, especially in a corporate environment, it's a lot more situation based and based on the scenario that you're in. So you definitely have to tailor it in regards to who it is specifically that you're talking to. For instance, if you're talking to a VP versus the CEO. And you also have to factor in what specifically you want to achieve through the elevator pitch. So if I were talking to the CEO and I want to be placed on, project X, my pitch would be very, very different than if I wanted budget funding for project X. I think at the end of the day, it's all about establishing almost like a personal connection with the person that you're talking to. And again, this is dependent on who it is specifically that you're speaking to. But if you can relate, maybe it could be, even a common goal. It could be an interest that you guys have in common. But if you can establish that personal connection, they're going to be much more receptive to whatever it is that you have to say, and will probably have a higher chance of giving you what it is that you want.